Good afternoon. My name's Paul Armstrong and I'm a solutions architect, and in this session we're going to talk around Amazon Connect and artificial intelligence services and how they can help you maximize your customer experience. So we're going to cover quite a few services, not too deep, but you'll have covered some of the services already in the sessions previously. But we're going to talk around some of the AI services offered by AWS, introduction to Amazon Connect, which is our contact center offering, and then walk through a use case of these services are talked around a lot, but actually how do you integrate them all together and how do you actually build an end-to-end solution? And then at the end we'll do a demo of the solution that we've walked through. And around that we'll also look at the reporting and the analytics using the tools we've been talking around in a real use case of our contact center data. So artificial intelligence services on AWS. AWS has been using artificial intelligence for a long time and has got a lot of history around its machine learning algorithms. But it was only in reInvent last year that we started to launch services where we started to talk about democratized artificial intelligence. And here we're talking around services that are available for developers to use that are packaged as APIs. So the complexity of the service is abstracted away from the developer, enabling them to focus on the outcomes. So the services that are available at the moment, I'm going to touch on Amazon Recognition just for completeness, but we're not really going to go into that service in any depth in this session. And Amazon Recognition is an image-based recognition service, enabling you to do object and scene detection, facial analysis, face comparison, and sort of facial recognition for searching in depth on large volumes of data. It's a really powerful service, and I would recommend going and having a look at it. And that's really focused on the vision aspects of the service. The next service that we have is Amazon Polly. Now, Amazon Polly is developed. It's text-to-life speech. And obviously, if we're going to be talking about the contact center, and we're going to be talking about how can we interact with our customers, this is a really important aspect of the service. But it's about accurate text processing, making it intelligent. It's adding semantic meaning to text and customizing it in real time. And that's where there's some really interesting use cases coming about. So to see it in action.
The night was about to fall, and we were still lost in the forest. As she heard branches cracking, Mary started to whisper,
"If you make any noise, they will find us. We need to walk silently to the lake."
And you can see there was whispering in there, in the context. There was a subtlety in the way that the words were pronounced, and there was the ability to lip sync it. So it's quite a powerful service that's actually very, very straightforward to use. Again, if you go and have a look at the console, you can see how that interaction works. And then we come on to Amazon Lex. Amazon Lex is about conversational chatbots. It's about the ability to capture information and then react to that in real time. So, for example, trying to book a hotel, capturing the destination, capturing how you're going to check in, the check-in information, but having the intelligence to interpret next Friday to a date and time. So again, this service is developed and it's built for multiple platforms. So you can see that, but it's built to support the SDK, so you can use it for mobile devices, IoT devices, and for web chat. And also, the important thing here is this is where we're going to use it to hook into Connect, and we'll talk about in more detail later how you go about that. So you input your speech, it goes through automatic speech recognition, natural language understanding, and then it's interpreted and it can respond doing text-to-speech using Polly. And this underlying engine is the engine that powers Alexa. So it's the same technology that's been reused but opened up into the AWS services and to the APIs. So it's about voice and text chatbots. It's multi-channel. It's got the same underlying engine that powers Alexa. The voice interactions on mobile, web, and other devices. And we're going to focus today on voice, and we're going to focus very much on the interactions with Connect. But of course, there are the other channels, Slack and so on, that you can use as well. And it will integrate into your other enterprise solutions. So when you look at the democratized AI services, you can see you have quite a powerful range of services for vision, for voice interpretation, and for text, and for speech. These build on the AI platform, which is machine learning, the elastic MapReduce, and the Spark, and the machine learning algorithms that have been used for quite a long time and are quite mature on the platform. Also, there is a lot of interest in the moment in deep learning, and deep learning runs on a variety of frameworks. At AWS, we're particularly interested in Apache MXNet at the moment and some of the capabilities in there. What we like about it is its portability and its scalability. But there is support for the other frameworks that are popular as well. And these frameworks are very, very processor intensive. So again, they're dependent on needing the hardware to actually run these engines and run these services. So you can see that there's a variety of services that can supplement the use of AI services for the customer experience. So what's Amazon Connect? Amazon Connect came about because Amazon is very, very focused on being a customer-centric company. And it's got millions of customers, dozens of languages in 32 countries. And one of the challenges was it needed the right contact center technology to deliver on that promise. And when we went to market, the tools were difficult to integrate. They required heavy professional services. There's a long lead time in terms of developing these solutions. So there wasn't a solution on the market that would work at the scale and with the flexibility that we were looking for. So we built it. Amazon Connect is an easy-to-use, cloud-based contact center solution, and it can scale to support your business needs. So you have the capability of an enterprise-scale solution that you can grow into as your business develops. It's got all of the technologies you would expect in terms of skills-based routing, call recording, real-time historical analysis, and high-quality voice capability. So it's self-service, and we're going to go through in a bit more detail how you configure Connect, but it's about you configure the solution through the console. You could log into the console today and be up and running within minutes in terms of having your own contact solution up and running. You can take your own numbers, you can have them up and running, and you can do some quite sophisticated routing very, very quickly. So this is about turning that lead time for the development of these solutions from months into minutes. It's about self-service, startup, all of the things that you're used to when using AWS services. It's dynamic, so it caters for personal and natural contact flows. It hooks in, so imagine if your telephony system has full access to the AWS services and the underlying services, how rich your solutions could be. So for example, if you were to take the customer experience,
Hi, Nikki Wolf. I see your flight was canceled today. How can I help you?
Can you please rebook me for the same flight tomorrow?
Okay, you are now booked for a 9 a.m. departure tomorrow out of San Francisco, arriving in Seattle at 11:45 a.m.
Great, thank you.
now when you look at that flow, it was dynamic. When the incoming call came in, the number was interrogated, there was a data dip into your CRM system, and then the context of the call was determined. Once you had the context of the call, you could ask the question, is this the reason for the call? The answer, there was the corresponding response, and then you could actually trigger the booking of the new flight. Now, if you see the potential of this, that flow is fairly straightforward. But what you're seeing is now how you're integrating in to the underlying services. And it's an open platform. One of the challenges with a lot of contact center software is that it's closed. this solution is open and integrated into the services that you're already familiar with. All your call recordings can go onto S3. You can use lifecycle policies for managing the cost of those. If you have compliance requirements to keep your data for 7 years, no longer do you need to go to complex backup routines. You can quickly retrieve your data. It can hook into into Lambda, and we're going to talk in a bit more detail about how Lambda integrates into the platform. It can hook into your other systems because it's all configurable via APIs. And as we've touched on, it integrates into the AWS ecosystem. And again, you only pay for it as you use it. So with Amazon Connect, and the pricing is up on the website, you only pay for your connected minutes. So again, you're not paying for all of the infrastructure up front. You pay as you go. It's no hassle. You configure it, you're up and running, and there's no required commitments. There's no long-term contracts, and it can manage the scale as you need. So again, you don't need to worry about infrastructure. You don't need to worry about hardware. So if you're setting up a new office, you can be up and running very, very quickly. And there's local numbers available globally. So if you're in the UK, you can take out UK numbers. It's not like you have to use a US number or you're restricted to a geographical region. And with the new region supports, Connect is currently available in the US East, it's available in Australia, and it's available in Frankfurt. But with this capability, you can still pick the numbers that are relevant to your business. So we've talked a bit about the services, we've talked a bit about Connect, but sometimes I find this quite difficult in that there's lots of services we're talking about, and how do you bring them all together? So I thought what might be interesting would be, let's walk through how we actually tie all the services together. There's a little bit of code in here, but the code is really just showing how the services integrate. We're not going to go too deep on terms of the code. So if we take a common use case, you want to receive a call into a team member. If that agent or team member is not available, you want to forward it on to the rest of the team. You want to be able to escalate calls. You want call recording, and you want to be able to search for your call recordings. You need the ability to integrate into your CRM, for example, Salesforce. And you want to email the team if someone's missed a call. Message boxes are great, but actually, maybe if you're not there, some of the other team members may need to react to that call. So how do you go about this use case? Fairly simple, but quite flexible. So firstly, you would go into the console and you would create a Connect instance. Now, Connect also has a requirement for a directory service for managing the login of the users from their soft phones. By default, when you first configure it, you use Simple ID, but you can use some of the other services. Once you have that instance configured, you need to just do some configuration around your implementation before you then actually go in and start to do your configuration. So within that, you want to define if you need incoming and outbound calls. Where do you want to store your data? What encryption do you need? Again, this is just using S3, so services that people are familiar with. And data streaming. Do you want to actually be able to feed out all of your contact information to a S3 bucket? And then you can interrogate that and link it up to other business scenarios. So actually, you can start to join up, and there's some really interesting use cases some customers have been doing of interacting changes in the market to the changes in the flow of the calls coming through their contact center. And integrate in, as we talked about, maybe integrate in with Salesforce. So when you bring all of these things together, the other thing you then need to think about is how do you want to actually manage your contact flows? And do you want interaction with Lex? In the demonstration today, we're actually going to do that interaction with Lex, but that isn't the most important thing. The important thing is the flexibility and how all of these services come together. So when you then log into your Connect instance, there's a dashboard to help you sort of go through your configuration. And we'll walk through this in a bit more detail. But the basic principles are you need to claim your phone number, you need to set your hours of operation and create some queues. You have the option to create your own prompts, to create your own music, to put your own recordings for voice, and then use the contact flows and manage the routing of calls through to your configured users. So it's fairly straightforward in terms of the approach. So in terms of claiming a phone number, is it a complicated process? Do you have to go and discuss this with other teams? No. It's all available through the console. So you can hook into the console, you can select your country, and then you can claim your numbers. And once you've got the number claimed, you're then available to start using that number immediately, which is quite powerful in terms of quickly getting up to speed and getting new numbers running. And those numbers can be in the country of your offices as well, which is important. You can manage those phone numbers. When you configure a phone number, you also give it a contact flow. And the contact flow is going to determine the behavior of calls as they flow into the system. All agents as well will have a queue. And the queue is what happens to calls that are flowed through the system and where they end up in terms of how they're processed. So you can distribute the queues through your contact flows. And you have an outbound queue as well. So for making outbound calls, again, you can queue up if you're using a common number. Now, contact flow, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but the principles are quite important. The contact flow is configurable through the console. So in this example here, you're coming into the console, and you're coming in, you have a number, it validates what that number is, and sets it to the queue, say, of the agent that that direct number is associated with. It then checks if you're available. So is there anyone on the queue? Is it out of hours? If there's no one available on that queue, it then tries to route it to the team. Is there anyone available in the team? Or is it out of hours? If it's out of hours, it comes through this flow and takes a message and exits. If it is in hours and there's no one available for the direct call, but there's someone available on the queue, it sets the queue and passes it through. You can start to see that it's very, very simple workflow logic starting to be integrated together. We're going to go a bit deeper on some of those boxes, but the flow is more important at this stage. There's also the ability to set the call recording. So you can set your call recording, you can record the person coming in, you can record the agent, or one or the other, depending on the type of call it is, and maybe there's compliance reasons why you don't want to have a recording on a particular flow. And again, all you're doing is by enabling that, it's storing your data in S3. Stores it with a unique timestamp, and there will be other metadata that we're going to detail in terms of how you can actually retrieve those recordings. So you have a call that's being routed in. You've got a contact flow that determines the queue that data is put on. You then have a concept of a working profile. A working profile is basically which queues are you going to take calls off as a user. So you would have your own queue, maybe have your team's queue, and maybe have an escalation queue. And you can set the priorities of how calls are taken off each of the queues, and you can have a delay for how long calls are on those queues. Again, this is about maximizing the customer experience and streamlining as quickly as possible, getting a customer to the right person as quickly as possible, and making sure that you don't have to be always taking messages and ringing back. And if you've got that information, you've got that context, you can use that logic to route your calls through to the right people. Then finally, your users. Your users will have a profile which gives them the ability to connect, say, through a soft phone, and also what capabilities they have within in the Connect system itself. So bringing all of this together, you can see that you've got your queues, you've got your working profiles, and you've got your users. And you can see that in our configuration, you would create 3 queues, you would create a working profile for each of our users, and then you would create the users and associate them to those working profiles. With Salesforce Integration, there is a package available that you can install into Salesforce with a configuration that basically needs to know the endpoint of your Connect implementation. Then within your Connect implementation, you can configure that application, and you can then support directly click to dial. So within your Salesforce, if you're making a lot of outbound calls, click to dial is quite a common requirement for most people who are using systems such as Salesforce. So that is basically it. And that's got you configured so you could actually be up and running. So with the basic contact flow, you have end-to-end routing of calls, you've got management of call recording, and now we're going to look at some of the more interesting integrations using some of the other services. And one of the questions that's come through on the feed is, does it do encrypted calls? And the answer is, yes, you can encrypt all of your contact flows end-to-end, and all of your data is encrypted in your S3 bucket. Moving on to the Lex integration, what you have to do is you have to give the Connect service permission to post content to Lex. So here, all we're doing is adding an inline policy that's allowing this particular Connect instance to post content to all Lex. Traditionally, you would lock it down to specific chatbots, but for the purposes of the demo, we're going to open up to everything in this particular account. Because we're doing some email notification, we're just going to create a simple SNS topic just to subscribe to the notifications. So all we're doing here is we're going to use this with Lambda to notify when a call comes through from the system. You could write more sophisticated logic if you needed to, but for demonstration purposes, this is quite useful. And now we're going to build our Lambda function. So we need to create a role. The role needs the permissions for executing Lambda, and it needs access to SNS. So you can see as you're building the layers down, all you're doing is opening up the security to the services that you need to run. And we're creating our Lambda function. I've written these particular examples in Python. That's just my background, but you can use the traditional Lambda languages, such as Node.js, if you prefer. This needs a role for execution, and we've got a description. This is about leaving a message from Lex. Now, within the Lambda function, just break it down into sort of 3 or 4 very, very simple functions. You have to, when you close and return back your message to Lex, you have to have the requirement to actually give a fulfillment state to say, have you successfully completed what was requested originally when Lex made the request to fulfill an intent. When you're actually interrogating your message and the intent, what you will have is slots, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but this is basically the information that you've picked up from Lex that you want to interpret and process. So you can see that we have an array of slots, and we're pulling out the data. And for best practice, we always recommend having a defined handler and then specifically validating that the intent that's come through from Lex is actually one that you expect to process, so you don't get any unusual behaviors in terms of your back-end processing. So you can see here, all we have is an entry point, validate the name as leave message, and then we call through and actually process the content. Because the slot arrays will be different for the different types of intents that you put in place. And we are using Lambda event variables, which is best practice for managing the topic ARN for the SNS endpoint. So you're not hard coding that into your logic, you're putting it as an external parameter to Lambda. And we have a test call. And basically what you have here is the definition of the data captured in terms of the intent name and of the slots, and then also the validation of the bot. Always the same when doing demo. So, now the other thing that we wanted to do was we want to have a call abandonment process. And in the call abandonment process, all we're doing is if we flow through all of our system and for some reason we've got errors or there's some reason why the interaction can't work, we still want to capture directly from Connect to Lambda and process an event. So very similar process in terms of we attach the policies. In this case, we're using SNS again, and this is enabling Connect to directly call Lambda. So you can see there's 2 different scenarios here, and we're building the code up. And what you have here is one of the things that's subtly different is you have to give the Lambda permission to be called from the Connect service. And what that will enable us to do is then configure the Lambda ARN in the contact flow to actually send out the message to SNS through the Lambda function. So in this Lambda, this isn't production code by any means, but you can see all I'm doing is I'm taking the message, dumping it from JSON and sending it to SNS. But what you can see is you've got all of the contact flow information that can then trigger the business logic you would want in your back-end systems. And again, you can see that the contact data has the relevant information, such as contact ID. It has, the initial contact, who was making the calls, who it was from, who it was to. So this you can use to start to do your data dips, hook into your CRM systems, and do that rich interaction. So we're now at the point where we've configured Connect, we've configured our back-end supporting functions in Lambda, and it's just the final stage of joining the two together. So in Lex, we're going to create a mailbot. And within a mailbot, we then have an intent, which is that we want to leave a message. And the question we're going to ask from the Connect flow is, would you like to leave a message? And at this stage, we're going to break it down into utterances to say you could leave the whole message, or you could respond and say, yes, please, yeah, I'd like to leave a message, I want to respond. So it's a request response. And based on that response, we then have a set of slots that we want to answer. And within each of these slots, basically what we're doing is we're defining the types that we want to capture in the intent. So I want to know the name, I want to know the reason for the call, the date and time you'd like me to be called back, and who I'm calling from. And there's a set of prompts to validate if you haven't got that information in the intent. The idea being you're trying to build up this information to then flow through. And whatever you define in those slots will then flow through into your Lambda for your back-end processing logic. And with those slots, there are predefined definitions, or you can create your own. So you can see for the call reason, we've started to build up a set of types that we would like. Is it a sales inquiry? Is it a complaint? Is it a billing inquiry? So you can start to build up your own rich interfaces for capturing the information in the flow. And when it's fulfilled, as in when Lex as a service has captured all of that information, it then will call the Lambda function that you've pre-configured. And all you're telling it here is to call your leave message. You've set up all the parameters on the interface, and you now have the flow through of the JSON. There are other intents that have been added. So best practice is when you have a flow, you have to allow people to leave. If you've used Alexa at home, you have to be able to stop an interaction. So you would want to have a no, you would want to have a cancel, you would want to have a stop intent. And when you've built your Lex function, you need to test it. You need to publish it, you need to build it, and you need to prove that the alias is working as you expect. And you can do that through the console. So you can try the exchange. This is a very simple exchange, and conversationally, we're still working on this. But the principle is asking for information, capturing that information, and then playing that back. Now, you can do that through the text interface, or you can test the voice as well if you choose to. So you configure Connect to integrate with Lex. So on the originating screen, you configure the ability to add a Lex box. So you've now pre-configured the Lex box, and you're giving your Connect implementation permission to use that Lex box, which then means in your actual contact flow, you can now see you have all of the intents, and you have the flow through to the prompts that are played once those intents have been fulfilled. So you can see now how you've integrated the service. You've specified your intents, you specified the mailbox bot that you're using, and that now gives you the ability to have different flow logic through the system. So this is just a mailbox, but it may be you have multiple intents that you would like to use. The direct call from Lambda. This is slightly different because you're invoking a Lambda function, so you need to define the ARN of the Lambda function. But the process is still the same. the logic flows through. It's just a different JSON interface that you pass the information through, and it's got your contact information on. So bringing all of this together, we've used quite a few services there. And you can see we haven't really written a lot of code. Obviously, you would write your business logic into the Lambda functions. But you can see that you've got integration from your CRM into Connect. You've got the flow through Lex and Lambda, or directly through to Lambda, sending out messages via SNS. And the important thing with permissions is every time you want to allow an interaction between services, you need to set up the least privileges permissions between those services. But you have all of this information. You're writing all of your S3 data into buckets, and you want to do reporting. So if we create a reports folder, what we can also do is then hook in Kinesis. So in this example here, we're going to hook in Kinesis Firehose, and all of the contact flow information that comes into Connect, we're going to write out into an S3 bucket. This is the simple configuration of Kinesis. In this particular example, we're not compressing it, but you can compress your data, you can encrypt your data as required. And you can see that in your Connect implementation, you need to enable data streaming and tell it the name of the Kinesis, either a stream or Kinesis Firehose that you're hooking in to your implementation. And a contact trace record has quite a lot of information on. You can see that you've got the account that you're running in, you've got the ARNs of the services you're connecting into, and you've got all of the agent information. When did the time come into the system to when it was answered? Where is your call recording location? So with all of this data now going into S3, how do you actually read it? Traditionally, I know you've just been talking about Glue and Athena, but think if you've got lots of data that you're not actually going to query that often, Athena is a very, very good use case for actually querying this data. So if we create a database in Athena, in this example, we've directly created the table construct. You can also use Glue, as you in some of the earlier sessions, and use that to actually catalog your data. So what you're now doing is creating a schema definition of all of your unstructured data that's directly in S3, enabling you to query your data. So you can see there I've got a very simple query that's querying my agent and querying my call recordings. So you can see that I can now query, if you've got a request comes in, I need to see all call recordings on this day or in this hour by this agent, you can quickly do that. And you're only paying for that service when you query the data. It's not a service that's up and running all the time. Very, very powerful. So you can see now, we've used quite a few services there, bringing them all together. But the principles are, you could just run Connect on its own. All we've shown is how can you integrate that into some of the other services and how they interact. It's demo time. Let's see how we do. So what I have is I have set up that actual implementation. And I'm going to do it quite slowly, so it will seem a bit labored, but that's by design. I'm going to call in. Because I have no agents configured on my call, it should direct me through to Lex, and it should then ask me the questions, what's my name, why am I calling, and then it should return back the response, and then it will give me the response to say that it has sent the message. Okay? Wish me luck with demos. So that's why my mobile was on here, and everyone's been calling me since they've seen me. So it's so okay. So
There is no one available to take your call. Would you like me to take a message?
yes,
Please leave your name.
Paul.
What is the reason for your call?
Sales inquiry.
What date would you like your call returned?
Tomorrow.
What time would you like your call returned by?
6 p.m.
this your company name?
Amazon Web Services.
Your message is Paul from Amazon Web Services would like to be called back by September 21st, 2017, 1800 hours regarding the following sales inquiry. Is this correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Your message has been sent.
And what that's now done behind the covers is triggered the Lambda, sent the message to SNS, and sent through to an email. And the email has the content. And you can see it's captured in the flow, the name, the company, the reason for the call, and when they would like you to return the call. So you can see that's a very, very simple example, but you can start to see the richness of the interfaces that you can build with the solution. Now, there's a few questions that have come through, so I'll answer the questions that have come through on the feed first, and then I can open up to any other questions. But just to summarize where we are, we've talked around how you can set up Connect from scratch, and you could go home and do that today. How you can manage the contact flows and the call escalation. How you can manage call recording. The integration with services such as Lex and Poly, you've seen it in action. Integrate it with Kinesis and integrate it, your contact data potentially into your data lake, into your other business data solutions. What sort of analysis can you start to do against business transactions in your contact center? How can you start to measure the performance of the business? How do you react as a business when there's a problem? And how can that in itself start to generate automated responses? We've looked at some of the analytics and reporting tools. This wasn't an in-depth review of them, but just sort of seeing them in action and starting to see how all of the services come together. We've talked a little around how you could integrate it into tools such as Salesforce and how you could have controls such that if anything happens and if that you have an abandoned flow for whatever reason, you can still get notification. So we've covered quite a lot in sort of 40 minutes, but actually it wouldn't take much longer than that to set that up. So you can see when we are talking within an hour, you could have quite a rich interface up and running quickly. So I've got a couple of questions on here, so I'll go through these first, and then I'll open up the floor to any other questions. So the first question I've got is, can you perform actions in the contact flow, such as a Lambda function or Lex bot after the call? i.e., can you have the customer answer a questionnaire after the call? Okay. You could do a transfer flow after a customer has completed a call, and then you could put some interface logic in there. So I think the answer is yes, you could. We just have to work through the specifics of how you would link it together. Does it have messaging capabilities like input, output, or can it be triggered with Lambda? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I think the question is can you trigger outgoing calls with Lambda? I think that's the motivation behind it. Not currently. What you can do is you can trigger calls through the contact interface and the streaming interface, but that's only really on a client basis. What you can't do at the back end is do outbound dialing, which I think is what we're looking for there. Not currently anyway. Can a call in like paid number session be read out for giving access to a specific service or whatever while the call is active or catch message? Can a call in like paid number session be read out for giving access to a specific service? So I think the question that's being asked here is, can a paid number be for giving access to a specific service while the call? I'm not sure I understand that question, but the next one is I can see in a fast way what service I have connected to. So there's a question here is there any flowchart or service available in AWS where I can see in a fast way what services I have connected to each other and zoom in on them for like policies. So it's that helicopter view of all of the services that we've put together. And the answer is there isn't really, at the moment, anything within the console that gives you that type of capability. But I think the question's coming from, we've interfaced quite a few services here, and how do you actually get that view of the policies and hooking them together? There are things you can do through CloudFormation and visualization, but they're not really, I think, what that question is asking. But are there any other questions around? We've covered quite a lot. Was that a useful walkthrough?
Skills-based routing, DCI, PCI, DSS. So I want to be able to actually stop my recording interactively during the call, and we talk very much about kind of skills that are root dimension. I want to actually set a single queue up and have agents retrieve calls based on their skill profile, which are architected as part of my business setup.
So the question, just repeat the question.
So the first one is skills-based routing.
Skills-based routing.
ACD capability. I have a team. Half of them can do sales. All of them can do service. If there's a sales call available and somebody actually can only do service, they won't pick it up. If there's a service, if there is a salesperson available, they'll pick up that call. So it's actually routing based on the availability of the agents within the team rather than having specific teams.
Yes. Okay. So the way that logic would work would be when it does that availability check on the queue, it would be based on who's available. So if you had split your skill sets into two queues, the way that would work would be if there was no one available on the first queue, it would route through to the second. Because that's the only logic you've got, haven't you, based on the number coming in.
We should have a separate conversation about it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. But there was another question, another part to your question, wasn't there?
So PCI DSS says that I can't actually record a call when I'm actually giving credit card information. Can I interactively turn off recording if I've recorded it for the rest of the call?
Yes, what you can do is initiate a transfer flow, and you can see that's why we've got that call recording enabling system, and what you can then do is turn off the call recording for the remainder of the call. Yes.
Let me rephrase his first question. Let's assume we have one inbound queue and one inbound queue, and that should be distributed over several queues afterwards.
So you have one inbound queue that you want.
Come in via one number in one queue, and I want now distribute them to, let's say, 5 internal queues, dependent on skills or criteria I've captured as information during the call.
Okay, so once you've captured the information during the call, as in you've
Let's assume the first question is, you want to buy something, yes or no? If yes, go to queue 1, if no, go to queue 2.
Yes, you can set up those types of interactions where you can ask those questions, and based on the responses, you can then route to the appropriate queue.
And then assign the same agent to both queues.
Yes. So the way to think of it is really the contact flow logic can be anything you want to determine which queues you actually route the call to, but your working profiles will then determine the sequence in which people answer those calls. So even though someone's on a queue for a team, it could be a manager after 20 seconds of there being calls on the queue could take the call. So you've got the combination of the routing logic, and you've got the combination of the escalation process as well through the profiles. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yes?
So this is great if you've got nothing and you're putting something new. What happens if you've got an existing solution and you want to bring this into the site? How easy is it to start routing from your existing phone system over to Connect as part of the migration?
Well, what I had some customers do.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. The question was, if you've got a new greenfield site, that's great, but what if you've already got a phone system and you maybe want to run this alongside? Is that a fair summary? The answer is, there's different ways of doing it. Would you have a new team set up with new numbers and then route their old numbers to the system? So I've seen some customers that have just forwarded on their previous numbers into the new system. and then they run the two alongside, and that's exactly what a lot of customers do when they're initially trialing the system. They actually just build up a small team, maybe a service desk, and have their old numbers forwarded onto the system and use it that way. There is no other real integration into the systems in any other way than that, other than maybe integration of the data. The only challenge you've got when you're doing forwarding is the number that comes through to this system will be the number you're forwarding from, not the original caller. So you then have to do some logic to actually join up from the other system who's calling in at that time. So that's one of the complexities I've seen in that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yeah?
What if you want to take your old system, get rid of that, move over to Connect script, use your old phone number? It's just similar to that, but completely abandoned your old system.
Well, you have to take the new numbers, and it depends who owns the old number and whether that is transferable. We have had some customers that have been able to buy regional numbers direct, but it really depends on your providers and the numbers, so we'd have to explore that in more detail. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.